And by then the Union line stiffens and the Union starts to hold the line, make a final stand along the Nashville Turnpike, right there. And with fading daylight, the battle comes to a close. Now, General Braxton Bragg feels pretty good about this, driven the army back, captured hundreds of prisoners, lots of cannons. And he sends a message to Richmond, to the War Department, saying, we won a great victory. But he may have spoken too soon. Overnight, from December 31st into the new year on January 1st, a Confederate soldier wrote that the night that followed was lonely and dark. There were no flickering campfires, although the night was damp and chilly. So think about those men bedding down tonight, probably amid the dead and wounded, without much shelter. So the next day is January 1st, 1863. There's no fighting really on January 1st. Both sides just sort of hold their position and reorganize themselves. Bragg thinks that Rosecrans is going to retreat, and he does start to see wagons moving up the Nashville Pike towards Nashville. But those are wagons of Union wounded. And eventually Union reinforcements will start to arrive from Nashville. So Rosecrans gets fresh troops. Bragg doesn't get any fresh troops. And as the day goes on, Bragg realizes Rosecrans is still here and he's not going anywhere. So overnight now onto January 2nd, here are the two army positions. Bragg has to decide what he's going to do. He's low on supplies, he's taken a lot of casualties, not sure how long he can stay here. And if you look at the Union Army, it's been driven back into that fairly small, tight, compact area, whereas before it was spread out. You know, think about it, they have 40-some thousand men, and now that 40, maybe a little less now, 1,000 men is squished into that tiny area. Well, on January 2nd, Rosecrans decides to push some of his troops across the river. And you see that at the top of the map. Crittenden will cross the river onto the east side and take some high ground, which is a good position. And Bragg decides that's what he's going to do on January 2nd, is attack that Union force. And he does it with the only fresh troops that he has left that haven't fought yet. They're under General Breckinridge. And this includes the Orphan Brigade from Kentucky. And by the time this all happens, it's about 4 o'clock. It's starting to get dark. Daylight's fading. But Bragg orders this attack. Breckinridge protests. This is not a good idea. But Bragg insists, and so Breckinridge leads his men forward. And they do push the Union troops back and across the river. And the Confederates will follow across the river. But the Union is starting to deploy artillery. And there's the river crossing today, called McFadden Ford. And the Union will assemble 58 cannon on the other side of the river. And they just blast the Confederates as they come forward. One soldier wrote, "The very earth trembled." And as the Confederates start to fall back and take heavy casualties, one commander tries to rally his men. With one hand he has the regimental flag, and with the other hand he has his sword. And he wrote that he used the blade freely on the men. My persuasions were not very effective, but the blows were. And finally, he got them to a place of safety. In this particular attack, Breckinridge will lose 1,700 of 5,000. So almost half his men in this short attack. So after January 2nd, the next day is January 3rd, General Bragg has a meeting with his commanders, and they agree it's time to pull back. And so the Confederate Army of Tennessee will retreat from Murfreesboro. The battle cost about 15,000 Union casualties and a little over 11,000 Confederate. So about 26,000 casualties for a 3-day battle. It is one of the bloodier battles of the war. I want to just show you a couple interesting features on the battlefield, if you're able to go. Here's the National Cemetery, monument to the United States regular troops from the regular army who fought there. And one of the really unique things is one of the oldest Civil War monuments. This was put up by General Hazen's troops, so it's called the Hazen Monument. It was put up in 1863. While the war is still going on, the troops who stayed there put up this monument, and there are burials around it. There it is today, the Hazen Monument. And again, the National Cemetery. And there's a couple other small monuments like this one for some Wisconsin and Ohio troops. And this is the site of the Union artillery that ended the battle on the high ground by the river. Now, in the weeks afterwards, things really fall apart in the Confederate Army. Bragg has to write back to Richmond and say, well, we didn't quite finish, wasn't quite a complete victory. We had to fall back. And in the days and weeks after the battle, the supply situation for the Confederates really falls apart. They're low on food, they're low on clothing, it's winter time. And there's a lot of arguing about what happened at Stones River and a lot of infighting. And finally, Bragg does two things, which really kind of seal the deal for him. First, he asks his commanders if they agree with the decision to retreat. And they all do. They say, yes, that was the right decision. And then secondly, he asks, if you do not feel that I'm qualified to command, I'll step aside. Now, could you imagine your boss doing that at work or something like that? What he does, he says, if I no longer hold the confidence of the Army, I will step aside. And when the answer comes back, he's really shocked because they all say, we appreciate your patriotism and your service and your dedication, but we feel that you should step aside. And he loses it. He refuses to step aside. And we start to have a lot of arguing, especially among those commanders like Polk and Hardee, some of the other lesser commanders. It gets really ugly. And it gets to the point where some of these commanders are talking to Richmond and they're arguing about Bragg's command. They're asking for transfers to get out of the Army. They don't want to serve with him anymore. Some are able to do that and they move on to somewhere else. But there's this culture of backstabbing and mistrust in the Army of Tennessee. And it's going to stay that way for a long time. Bragg is eventually replaced later, but the damage is done. And this Confederate Army really suffers because of all that internal turmoil. But Stones River is important because, first of all, it is a Union victory. It's not much of one, but the Confederates attack, fail to break through, and retreat. And so the Union occupies Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee is a very rich agricultural area. A lot of food supplies come from that area, horses. The Confederates never get it back. That lingering tension in the Army of Tennessee, it just undercuts the Army's efforts from then forward. The war is accelerating. Now what I mean by that is the Union is starting to take harsher measures against civilians. They're really starting to ramp up their industry. The war's been going on for over a year now, going into 2 years, and Stones River is part of that process of the Union really pouring everything it has into the war effort. And then the Emancipation Proclamation went into effect on January 1st. So all of those things are really important coming out of Stones River. And I worked at the battlefield. I've always been interested in this battle. And so I wanted to write a book capturing some of the highlights and the great stories. It's not super detailed, it's just a good overview. That's what I wanted to do with this. And so with that, I will ask if anybody has any questions.